went to stay with this woman. I think she lives out in the suburbs. So, yeah, she couldn't.
Yeah, so she went to help her friend after surgery.
I guess she's helping her out, you know, while she's recovering from the surgery.
Yeah, because I know Linda was doing much better. You know, she had the medication, so
Yeah.
she didn't have to be office. I mean, not office. They're at family reunion, the Baines, family reunion in Missouri, St. Louis, right?
Yeah, Michelle was originally from St. Louis. And so her family, every year around this time, they have a reunion, they get together. That's been going on for as long as I've known.
I know, and all the parents and uncles and aunts are gone, but the cousins still do it. Isn't that nice? We used to have it for my father's side, but they don't always come to New York, to Chicago, because we do it, but New York never would figure out how to host it, so they never did. And then we got tired of it. My mother's side, everybody just went to Tennessee. But then when her brother passed, it stopped. So. I went to see the movie about Celine Dion. Celine Dion's story.
What about her?
You know, it talks about her stiff person syndrome. Yeah, sickness. It really shows her in it, just so sad and painful. It affects her singing, so that's the big thing, big change. She doesn't have that powerhouse voice in her. She can sing, but it doesn't sound the same person. So
I saw her twice and she put on such a wonderful show.
she can't do it now.
It was amazing. Her show was so good. And she just looked so beautiful. And her clothes were gorgeous. And
Yeah, they showed all that, you know, because she wanted everybody to see, because she said she was lying for a long time, telling people she had ear infection or sinus infection, it was that. And she finally just, not just told the truth, but she showed people what she goes through, her body goes through. It's like having a cramp, it stays. It starts in one foot, the other foot, legs, but the whole body, and it's so painful. So she has a physical therapist there all the time. Helps her with different medications, and he gave her some a nostril thing, and he did it twice. He said, if it doesn't work in a few minutes, they call 911. But it did bring her out of it. But it was so much pain you could see.
Yeah, sometimes I'll get cramps.
I know.
In my feet or my lower leg, and a couple times I had cramp in my thigh, and those are the worst.
Charter horse,
so bad.
yeah, but it's like we're having a charter horse. It doesn't.
And then you wonder, you know, what if it didn't go away?
Exactly.
And yeah, that would be really.
That's what hurts. But you know what to do for yours, right? B12 brings it out right away. Put it right under your tongue, it melts.
Oh,
B12. Because I've been, okay, you could go to the store and get some B12. You get that, because I would wake up in you know what prevents it, not only magnesium, but drinking water.
yeah, I heard that if you let yourself get a little dehydrated, that it bring that.
Yeah, with the middle of the night, go to Charlie horse in your thigh.
Yeah, those are, I don't get those very often.
I know, right?
I get them in my feet a lot.
Yeah, me too.
Is this a ladies' class now?
Apparently not.
I'm not a ladies' class teacher. I guess I am today, huh? Well, maybe that way. All right.
What are we studying? I was going home, but now that you're here, I can't sneak out. So.
In case you're feeling a little warm, the air conditioner is not working in the basement for some reason. Went out last night. It was working fine yesterday. So you might be a little warm today. But luckily it's not too hot outside, so we should be okay. Have to get our air conditioning man out here tomorrow.
Could open a window.
Yeah, well, I have the fan running, it is circulating the air a little bit. I think that's all we'll need. Now I can bring in a floor fan if anybody gets too hot. A little water here. Somewhere.
Where are we? You picking up from, where Alan left off?
Yes.
First
Peter chapter 4.
Okay.
Yeah, we're gonna try to cover that chapter today. If not, we'll finish it next week. He'll be gone for 2 weeks. Actually, they'll be here Wednesday. They'll come back for a few days and then they're going back out to New York. Try to see Vicky. There's nobody out there in cyberspace. I guess they heard Alan was out of town. Let's see if I can adjust this a little bit.
Only gonna be a high of 77 today, so we should be.
Yeah, it's not as hot as it was yesterday. Okay, we're doing a lot better. Hello. Good to see another man in this group. I thought I was gonna teach the ladies group today,
Right.
the ladies class.
Quite noticed that.
All right, we'll break it up a little bit. That's good. Unless you want to put a wig on or something.
Oh, no, I'm all right.
You're not.
He's fine.
I'm all right.
Yeah, we'll be consistent.
Go.
How's it going with you?
Not too
You're
bad.
wrapping school up, right?
Yeah.
When you gonna graduate?
The summer, so let me see.
Pretty soon.
We start doing classes done the 19th of July. Summer.
You got a few weeks to go.
I see it over in August 4th,
Yeah.
so
All right.
I just gotta make sure my credentials are all set to the Illinois State Board of Education. All,
Good.
right in there.
Well, good. I'm sure you're looking forward to that, right?
I did a lot of ways.
All right. You got big plans for afterwards or?
No.
Those jobs lined up or
Just get work.
anything, or-
Yeah.
Just
So
kinda-
I'm gonna stay at the school I'm at. So, yeah. So,
All right.
Special education.
Huh?
It's good you already know the staff. and
That's right, the lay of the land, the kids, the families, that else was.
That's great. You're getting the education while you can.
That's right,
When you get older, it's harder
right.
to study. I can't imagine going back to school now.
Yeah, I mean,
I
it's tough,
I did well to get through 4 years at Harding,
yeah.
but I don't think I could do it again at 70. You're just not as geared for that kind of thing.
Right, I agree.
Whatever. So I'm a big advocate of getting education when you're young, and before you get busy with other things. A lot of people try to go back to school, but they never make it.
Yeah,
they have good intentions.
Right.
I have a brother-in-law that said, I'm gonna go back and get my PhD. He never did. He tried. He got some classes in, but things fell apart. He got married, started having kids and, everything, career, and never got back. So, but he's a guy that should have made, his PhD. It happened, but whatever. Those things happen.
For a reason, yeah.
All right, thanks for joining us, Michael. All right, I want to welcome everybody to our class. You're noticing, sure that Al and the family are not here. They are down in St. Louis, the great city of St. Louis, where Michelle grew up. She has a lot of family down there, and they happen to have a big family reunion every year about this time. So they like to go down and be a part of that. And I'm sure they're either worshiping with us online or they're visiting with the church down there too. I'm sure they are. But hopefully they're not burning up. It's usually a little hotter down there. And then I know next week they're going to be in New York visiting their daughter. So we'll carry on for 2 weeks here in their absence. All right. Well, as I mentioned earlier, we're looking at 1 Peter chapter 4. If you have a Bible, please turn to that, or your phone, whatever you have going there. We have some Bibles over there on the shelf if you need them. So to review a little bit and introduce our lesson this morning, I want to answer the question. This is a rhetorical question. Why is 1 Peter, this whole book we're talking about now, why is it so important? All the books of the Bible are important, right? I think we'd all agree with that, or they wouldn't be there, right? And every chapter of every book has got something to say to us about our life as a Christian, or it wouldn't be there. Just that's the way it is. But some seem to be a little more important, a little more relevant to our lives than others. But I'm here to say that this is a very relevant book. It may not seem to be relevant at some times, but it is relevant, and we can grow in our Christianity by studying it. And that's why we're studying it today. Why is it so important? Well, I'll give you a little introduction here. 1 Peter focuses on the importance of believers continuing to live well, in other words, consistently, well, if and when they should suffer for the sake of Christ, okay? So the main theme of the book has to do with suffering, but the second part of it has to do with what does it look like for a Christian to live, whether he's suffering or not suffering, We're fortunate in our country not to have to suffer for the cause of Christ, but we'll talk a little bit more about that later. And so and I'll show you, I think, how this is still a relevant subject, even though we're not suffering persecution like goes on in many other parts of the world. In this way, 1 Peter, though, might be called the Job of the New Testament. We're all familiar with Job, right? The man who suffered greatly, lost virtually everything except his wife, his nagging wife. And he was a righteous man, right? Okay, so we're familiar with Job a little bit. I hope we are. If not, read the book of Job. And so we could say that this book is kind of like that. The letter provides encouragement for true believers to press on in the way that Jesus has laid out for his followers to press on if they're suffering for his sake. So it's also about endurance. Peter calls believers to pursue in a way that's similar to Job. Okay, isn't that what Job did? He persevered, right? He never cursed God for all. He was covered from his head to his toe with boils. You can imagine all the pain that he was in. Not to mention he lost all his property and his children and just about everything he had. But he never cursed God. He always had a respect for God, and he never lost his belief. So in that way, see, he's calling us to be kind of like Job, all right, in this book. We're to pursue a life that he demonstrated in a lot of ways. A man who suffered in spite of his righteousness, okay? So that's kind of the gist of it. The first letter from Peter maintains that this is the kind of perseverance that God expects from his people. Maybe we don't like to hear it. That's kind of a hard lesson, right? God expects us to persevere through about anything. That's basically and that's what Peter did, right? He's our example here. And that's why he can speak with authority. History has it, historians have it, scholars have it, that Peter was crucified upside down for his Lord, for his faith, okay? And it was his idea to be crucified upside down because he didn't want to be crucified right side up like Jesus was. Out of respect for Jesus, he said, no, if you're going to crucify me upside down. That's the kind of guy that Peter was. He was a man that I would say was very Christ confident, okay? Paul was also, and that's why they stand out so much in the Bible as early Christian leaders, and why we can read their letters and really appreciate the authenticity of them. Okay, he was like that. He was crucified upside down, a Christ confident man, and we're going to see that in this letter. He's going to be pointing us to Jesus, to be like Jesus, to do it like Jesus. Jesus suffered, right? Not just on a cross. He suffered in many different ways throughout his life. People were always trying to track him down and kill him and hurt him, put him in jail, all kinds of stuff. He received whippings and lashings and all this stuff, but he always persevered through it. And so he's our ultimate example. Okay, Job is a secondary example, but Jesus, of course, according to Peter, is our first example to look for if we ever run into this kind of suffering and persecution that can come. So why is this letter we're studying so important? I kind of ask the question again, because we're going to go a little further into this. I just hit on some things there. If we are ever called to suffer for Christ, do you think we'll ever be called to suffer for Christ? Are things changing in our country right now? If you're listening to Patrick's sermon this morning, you just heard about one change, right? How church attendance in the last 10 years has dropped significantly in our country. All right? What does that tell us? Country's going more agnostic. And I don't know if there's a God or not. It's going more atheistic. I don't believe in God, and that's basically what it's telling us. That's the way our country is going right now. Now, that doesn't mean it can't change. It doesn't mean there can't be revival. I think there can be, and there will be at some point, if God continues on our country and this world long enough, because, the suffering that comes, from these changes, it can come from these type of changes. Other changes, you might notice, our country has drifted away from Judeo-Christian values, right? The values that we study about in the Bible over and over again, those are eroding. People are not looking to the Bible and Christian leadership anymore like they used to years ago in our country. That's been documented. So we're shifting away from Christian Judeo values to what I would call political correctness. My wife might not agree with that, but political correctness is kind of taking its place. Well, let's look to the politicians. Let's look to the people in Hollywood. Who in the world wants to look to the people in Hollywood for how to live a moral life, a spiritual life? Those are the most immoral people in the world. They live like alley cats, fooling around and all this stuff. But that's kind of how our country is going. Look to the people in Hollywood, look to the politicians. They know, they're well educated, they went to Oxford or something, but they don't have the answers either. Look how mixed up our politicians are. They have some answers, they're intelligent people. They have good education, but they don't have, most of them are not biblically, literate anymore. We do have some Christians in Congress, believe it or not, in the House of Representatives, that meet regularly for prayer. That's a little light, in Washington, that there are some Christians that are still centered on the Bible, and they have these values, but they're a very small group. They're a very small group, very small minority. They invite other people to come, like Patrick was kind of talking about today. Invite people to come and be a light for Jesus. But most people, nah, we don't need that stuff, whatever. So there is still some light, Christian light and spirituality there in Washington, but we won't go into that. But anyways, I'm just saying, things have changed and are changing. We've seen that a lot in the last 20, 30 years. We could talk more about that, but I want to go into that too much. Just take it from me and looking around, that suffering, a level of suffering by Christians can change. Okay, it's kind of like suffering. The way I see it, kind of comes around like the pandemic. Doesn't happen very often, does it? We just went through one, right? COVID, right? We haven't had anything like that for a long time. And we had a polio epidemic years ago when I was growing up. But suffering kind of comes and goes around the world. It's kind of strange. It just kind of comes and goes. And you never know when it's going to hit sometimes. But most of the time we don't have it, right? Like most of the time we don't have any suffering. But I guarantee you, if you were in China today or North Korea, you would be suffering for your faith. And there are Christians there right now suffering for their faith in places in the Middle East that you can lose your life, be put in prison very quickly if you're known to be a leader. If you have a house church, let's say a church meeting in your house, and your neighbors find out about it, and they're a radical, a Muslim or something, they can have you arrested, or they can find a way to persecute you, and they can have your family taken away. All kinds of stuff like this. All right. So, anyways, don't be fooled. This goes on right now, and it can get worse. So this. I'm just pointing out the validity of this letter. This letter will prepare us for a time like that, if it ever comes our way, and it can in our lifetime. Hopefully, it won't. We don't want persecution. We don't want suffering or anything. I want to ever give anybody the impression that we want it, but there are some advantages to it, as the lesson will show. So why is it important? If we're ever called to suffer for the sake of Christ, this book will provide the encouragement we will need to press on in the way Jesus has laid out for his followers to press on. And that is, you keep pressing on whether you're suffering or not, just like Job did, okay? Just like Jesus did. If he allowed suffering to stop him, we wouldn't have a church today. We wouldn't have a faith today. We wouldn't have much of anything. So he persevered, and of course he went through extreme persecution. I don't think we'll ever have to go through anything as extreme as he did. But as I'm going to show you in a little bit, there are other forms of suffering that we could go through. Before we get to the chapter 4, I want to share with you a little paragraph from my study Bible. It will help us to gain an insight into this book of 1 Peter. All right, I want to share this with you. This will give us a little, just listen to it. This will give us a little insight into this book that we're covering right now. Living in close proximity to Jesus Christ for 3 years. Remember, this is Peter. He lived with Jesus. They traveled around. They left their family behind, and they traveled with Jesus. It's like going on a road trip. For 3 years, provided the apostle here with the perfect example of what it looks like to live a holy life in a hostile world. The world was hostile to Jesus, wasn't it? On and off. It's still hostile to Christians on and off today. Not much has changed, really. More than that, any other man who has ever walked the earth, more than any other man, Jesus modeled that kind of lifestyle, right? He went right through it. Peter, therefore, points his readers to the best possible direction, and that is to Jesus himself. He will refer in this letter, you'll see it, in this chapter, look to Jesus. Look to Jesus for the example and strength to endure suffering. The apostle calls Christians to worship Christ as Lord, which we do, right? The Lord of our lives, so that we might serve as witnesses to the gospel during our short time here. So hopefully we're all doing that. He then urges us towards making Jesus the focal point for ordering our lives in the midst of trials and tribulations. In other words, you're going to have to keep Jesus up front every day. If you're facing trials, we all face trials, right? There all kind of trials and tribulations, and suffering too. We could add that on there. We have to keep Jesus as the focal point. That's what he's going to tell us. We'll see that coming up. By rooting our perseverance in the person and work of Christ, believers can always cling to hope in the midst of suffering. Do you think that's true, Michael?
Yes.
We have hope, don't we? We have a hope that the world doesn't have. And this is borne out through all the ages since the time of Christ. Millions of Christians who have been put through all kinds of trials and tribulations have held on to the hope that Jesus offers, and have gotten through it. Okay, I can give you several examples, but this has been proven to work, as I'm saying. This is not some pie in the sky theory or idealism. This is practical advice that if we have that living hope that Jesus, rose from the dead, he's coming back to save us for eternity. We get our sins forgiven, all those basic things, and we got to keep that as a focus. Though you got to keep a focus on it. That gives people hope to carry on, because they know there's a better life coming after this one is over. This isn't all it gets. This is not as good as it gets. So that hope is real, and that's something that Peter is going to bring out in this book here, because he obviously had it, right? He endured a lot in his life after Jesus left the earth and ended up on a cross, but he was faithful to the end. Nobody can ever doubt that. Nobody's going to ever accuse him of caving in, or compromising his faith. If anything, he was the one who was always up front, kind of blundering through things sometimes, being too blunt maybe sometimes or something. But he was a very bold person. All right, we can learn from him as we study his life, but that's another subject. But that's the man we're talking about here who wrote this letter. Okay, so let's keep that those thoughts in mind as we go through this letter here. All right. On chapter 4 now, which starts on giving us a partial picture of what living for God looks like. All right. That's what we're going to see a lot in this chapter. He's going to give us like little snapshots. You ever have a camera that takes like an instant picture? Maybe years ago they had these Polaroid cameras, right? Take a quick picture and you instantly have a little snapshot of something that took place. And that's kind of what he's doing here. He's giving us little snapshots all through this chapter of what the Christian life should be looking like, whether you're under persecution or suffering or not. Either way, this is how it's supposed to be. He's saying God expects us to be consistent, to the best of our abilities. We're all human. Some of us are going to be more consistent than others if we face suffering or persecution. But this is to be the way we carry on, is what he's saying. All right, and he's writing to a church that is going to experience severe persecution in Asia Minor. You've heard of Nero, the crazed Nero, Roman Empire. He's about to inflict persecution on the churches that he's writing to. Okay? And he was crazed. He blamed Christians for burning Rome and all kinds of stuff. And a lot of them got persecuted severely for it. So he has an idea what's coming. So that's why he's writing this letter, I think, to prepare them for this. And they went through it. The church survived, right? We have the church today because of it. Nero didn't wipe it out. He tried. And other people have tried to all through the centuries. They've tried to wipe out Christ and his church, but every time it has failed. Every time, because God's word here is strong. It doesn't die out, and it keeps producing Christians who study it, who develop faith. So it's just perpetual, like a perpetual plant, right? It keeps coming up every year. We have these plants in our garden. Every year they pop up. No matter what you do, they keep popping up, whether you like it or not. They keep popping up. They have seeds and bulbs that are way down in the ground, and they just keep shooting up. But that's kind of like how God's word is. It's perennial. That's the word. I think perennial. They keep going. All right. Let me see. I'm going to get a little drink of water here. I'm running out of. I'll let you talk in a little bit if you want. All right, look, I just want to get through this introduction here and see how far we can get. So this chapter, I say, is going to give us a partial picture. It can't include everything in 19 verses, but it's going to give us some very good pictures of what it looks like to be a Christian. And that's along with the theme of how to endure suffering. So those are the two main themes of this chapter and the whole book, really. How to live the Christian life and how to endure suffering. All right, which is something that Peter learned to do very well. Live the Christian life and always be faithful no matter what. And he learned to endure suffering to the end. All right, who wants to read verse 1? Chapter 4. Let's see. All right, go ahead. Read that first verse there.
What version do you prefer? NIV or
Whatever version you
prefer?
prefer.
Amplified. All right, verse 1. It says, therefore, since Christ suffered in the flesh and died for us, arm yourselves like warriors with the same purpose, being willing to suffer for doing what is right and pleasing God. Because whoever has suffered in the flesh, being like-minded with Christ, is done with intentional sin, having stopped pleasing the world.
Okay, very good. Oh, he jumps right in there, doesn't he? talking about living for God, and this is a part of what living for God is in Peter's mind, okay? And he's trying to convey that to the church and to us today. So let's see what. So this is, like I said, what a part of living for God. We will, like Jesus, if we're living for God, be ready to suffer, is what he's saying, and this will demonstrate that we will, like Jesus, have said no to our flesh. Isn't that what he had to do at times? Somebody's about to drive a spike into your hand, something. He was exceptionally good at this. I don't think we'd be as good at it as he was, but he was able to say no to the flesh. Hey, his flesh would be screaming at him, but I have to endure this. I'm accomplishing my Father's will. I got to finish the course. And that's what Jesus did. And so he's saying that we're going to have to be nailed to a cross, but there are going to be times in our life when we have to say no to our flesh. And that is a sign of a Christian, a mature Christian, not a new one that just came out of the water of baptism or something. They don't know much. We didn't know much when we got baptized, unless you've been in the church a long time. But he's saying this is a sign of a mature Christian. They can say no to the flesh. And that's to be an attitude we have and part of our lifestyle as Christians today in modern, America. And that's being similar to Jesus, right? That's what he's saying. So I believe that there are two kinds of suffering that go on in the world today and in Jesus' time. And that's the severe physical type that Jesus endured on the cross and Peter on the cross, okay? And they're also the emotional type of sufferings that go on, the more common forms that we would experience. What if you suddenly lost a job after 20 years? You really put your heart and soul in that job, right? And you saw a promotion coming, and all of a sudden your boss fires you. Now that's tough, right? Maybe you didn't have a plan B, It happened to me one time. I lost a job all of a sudden after 15 years, and I thought I had a future there. And that was hard. That's an emotional suffering. See, when I was a child, 15 years, one day I got called in and let go. The company was downsizing. We were losing business. It wasn't really my fault. It was just one of those things. They had to let go of supervisors. I was the newest supervisor in the group, so I got let go. So that was a tumble period. You all of a sudden, you have to go on unemployment. Luckily, we had unemployment. And I got to totally reorient myself. And it turned out to be a good thing, because I got a better job than I had originally with a better retirement program. So it turned out to be a blessing. But still, you go through that 6-month period or whatever of emotional stress and suffering. You have a family, young family to take care of. So whatever, that can happen to any of us. Don't think if you have a job, it's going to last forever. It's not. Unless you're extremely lucky. But that's an emotional type of thing that can happen. You could lose a family member that seemed like they're going to last, live forever. Your parents or something. All of a sudden they die of a heart attack. And you're left. That's emotional suffering. You got to make up for that loss somehow, and it takes time. Or you could go to the doctor. And all of a sudden he tells you got terminal cancer. Wow, that's heavy. Wow. A lot of people, they won't go to the doctor because they don't want to ever hear those words, even if they got cancer. They don't want to hear those words. That's the thing they fear most. Those are the most feared words in America. You know that? You got cancer. There's not a lot of other things we might think of. It's you got cancer. So those are 3 examples of emotional suffering that we could have today in our world. They could experience that back there, something similar too. But those are kinds of sufferings that can come upon us. And when that happens, we can say, well, why me? Right? Why am I going to have this cancer? Why did I lose my parent? Why did I lose my job that I thought was going to last forever? As long as I needed it. So we could blame God for that. Like Job could have blamed God, or Peter could have blamed God for some of the persecutions that came on him. So I'm just saying that there are 2 different kinds of sufferings that I think this letter applies to. Okay, his advice here can help us in either way, whether it's a physical-based suffering like Jesus had. And don't think his suffering wasn't emotional too. When he was on that cross, he had a lot of emotional and mental anguish too. It wasn't just physical, it was mental. And some of these emotional things I'm talking about can become physical. You get sick sometimes with too much anxiety. Some people get sick. they feel pain, physical pain in some way or another. So anyways, it go both ways. So his advice can help us through all these different types of situations that we might just find ourselves in, and most of us do at different times in our life. We find ourselves in these situations where suffering, trials and tribulations are all kind of related. They come at us and we have to face it, okay? Get a little more water here. So that's why I think this book is very relevant, okay? It's showing us how to deal with this stuff as we go through it, you'll see. All right, so this is God's will, that we learn how to skillfully, by following his directions, go through it and be steady, you know, don't fall down, in other words, don't fall down and lose your faith, you know, over something that you could get through it with, you know, like Peter did, Job. All right, so the first thing he says, what living for Jesus looks like is we can say no to our fleshly nature. All right, that's something we're gonna have to work on. Okay, it doesn't happen overnight. I believe that there are two kinds of sufferings. All right, who wants to read verse 2? Diana, you want to read verse 2 there?
As a result, he does not live the rest of this earthly life for evil human desires, but rather for the will of God.
All right, what he's saying here, we will be anxious to do God's will. Is that something that's a part of our life? That's the picture he's trying to give us here. No matter whether you're going through suffering or you're not, you got it easy. You're on easy street. We should be anxious to do God's will, having gotten our physical desires under control again. Okay, our physical desires, fleshly nature again, kind of talking about, can pull us away from doing God's will, right? From being anxious to do God's will. So he's saying you're gonna need some discipline in your life. A Christian that's got some maturity, they're gonna have some discipline in their life, and that's going to help them to be anxious to do God's will, because you put some of these other desires. Not that all our desires are bad. Some of them are. Pull us the wrong direction, and some of our earthly desires pull us in a good direction. And God, adding God into our lives, kind of amplifies the good direction desires we have and pulls us the right direction. So, but he's saying if you got some maturity, you can put these unhealthy desires behind you and put his healthy desires, on the front burner, so to speak. And so that's kind of what he's saying there in verse 2. So, chasing your own desires. He's saying he saw that in some of the church members there, and you will be anxious to do God's will. So that's something we need to ask ourselves periodically. Am I anxious to do God's will? Okay, basic thing. Or are other things crowding out my anxiousness to do God's will?
How do you know what God's will is?
Well, that's why we're studying it right here. We come to Bible class. That's one of the main ways to know. The other way was to study the Bible on your own and listen to Patrick on Sunday morning. He's going to be explaining to you God's will every Sunday. If you listen to his sermon, you will learn something new. Or at least maybe something you forgot years ago. It'll come back to you. So you listen to the preacher. That's why we hire a preacher and bring him here to preach us God's word. And he is very insightful. He's gone to Harding College. He studied Greek. He can get into the original language, and he can understand it in ways that we can't, because we've never taken Greek. None of us speak Greek, do we? Okay. So you don't speak Greek, then you can't read this Bible as deep as Patrick can. Okay, believe me. I looked at that Greek language, and it is so tough. I couldn't even begin to try to learn it. But you think Spanish is tough, or German, or many other languages. They're not as tough as Greek. It's one of the toughest languages there is on the planet, believe me. But anyways, to really be a good scholar, you have to know Greek. But so we learn from the preacher, right? We learn from the Bible teacher like Alan. We learn from studying on our own. That's where you learn God's will, okay? And it's something we should be doing every day in some way or another, touching base with God's word. That's how we stay strong as Christians. Don't just depend on the preacher on Sunday to fill you up. Now, he can fill you up and get you off to a good start for the week, but he's not gonna give you everything you need, all right? So, but I'm a big advocate of Bible class. I always support it, and that's why I'm here today helping fill in for Alan. Because I believe it's very important that all Christians get into their Bibles every week, and so on as many occasions as possible. All right, so are we anxious to do God's will, having gotten our physical desires under control? Okay, and put behind us. Sometimes you just have to tell you, kind of put your physical desires behind you. Get behind me, Satan, kind of thing. Not that they're all from Satan, but there are desires that we need to just say, hey, get back there. I'm moving forward, with the Spirit of Christ. Spirit of Christ has to be front and center, in other words, okay, for the Christian. That's what he's saying. Okay, so there's a little meat there for us, right? That's a little depth. And Peter lived this. We can count on him to be authentic here, okay? All right, so that's a lot in that verse too. So you won't be anxious to do God's, so you'll be anxious to do God's will. All right. Who wants to read verse 4 here? Or verse 3, I mean. Sorry.
All right. For the time already passed is more than enough for doing what the unsaved Gentiles like to do, living unrestrained as you have done in a course of shameless sensuality, lust, drunkenness, carousing, drinking parties, and wanton idolatry.
Okay. Evidently that was going on in some of the churches' membership, or maybe in the past, something, so he felt he had to address it. So the idea here is you have changed. If you're a Christian, you've got some maturity, you're not going to be like this. You're not going to go to wild parties. You can go to a party, right? We just had some graduation parties, right? We have bridal shower, parties, and baby parties, when the child is born, and all kinds of good kind of birthday parties, all kinds of good parties, but we're not going to be a part of this kind of a riotous living kind of party. So he's saying you have changed towards Christ and put away evil, godless things, such as immorality, he mentions, lust, drunkenness, wild parties, the worship of idols. You don't think these things still go on today like it did back then? They do. You know that. Just look around you. You can see people that are getting drunk and getting it high on drugs. Every day it's a problem in Chicago and all around our country. Wild parties go on, and unfortunately, a lot of times shooting starts at these wild parties. Immorality goes on, all kinds of lustful things that are evil. So the world really hasn't changed much, has it? I mean, these things, and they take different forms. Idolatry has taken a different form, and we don't go around worshiping images made of gold, but people worship money. They worship power. They worship all kinds of things that can be idols in their lives. Just, you might say they're idols American style rather than back in the Roman style back here. But anyways, we have changed. A Christian that will have changed, he's saying, if they're really following Christ, if they're genuinely following Christ. All right, so we're not to be a part of any of that kind of stuff going on, okay? All right, who wants to read verses 4 through 6? Ginger, you got it?
Sure. They're surprised that you do not join them in their reckless wild living, and they keep abuse on you. They will have to give account to him who is ready to judge the living and the dead. For this is the reason the gospel was preached even to those who are now dead, so that they might be judged according to human standards in regard to the body, but live according to God in regard to the Spirit.
Okay, he says a lot in there, believe it or not. Peter's readers were suffering from losing friends. We wouldn't want to lose friends, would we? We could lose friends though too today. I think I've lost a few over the years, and some people are very sensitive to this. They value their friends maybe a little closer than other people do. But they were. So then again, this is a picture he's given us. As a Christian, you may have be a person who lost some friends because you're following Christ. But you've also, on the other hand, gained friends, right? In the church, you gain friends when you fellowship with other Christians. If you're in a church long enough, you're going to gain some friends. So they're losing some friends. They're evil, basically, worldly people, and they're going to be gaining some Christian friends. But the thing is, these evil friends they're losing, who were meaningful to them, who now slandered them because of their faith to the cause of Christ. Now, this is what's going on. So this is a form of suffering, right? If you have meaningful friends and all of a sudden they turn on you and want nothing to do with you, that's a form of persecution. And that can happen today, just like it happened back then, see? So they're being, and on top of this, their friends are slandering them. That's terrible. Nobody wants to be slandered. Bad enough, you lost their friendship, and now they're on top of that, they're slandering it. It's like a double whammy, you know? Their former friends are part of what he means. Losing former friends, though, I'm saying, is a part of what it means to live for God. That's what Peter's saying. So that maybe is a sacrifice that we have to make. If you're going to follow Christ, you're bound to lose some friends. Everybody agree? And maybe has anybody here lost a friend because of that? I know I have. My best friend coming out of high school. He went to Urbana. I went to a Christian college. We were the closest, but we just drifted apart. We just went different directions. Opposite directions. He became an airline pilot. But that was fine. That was good. But it also became more atheistic. He was raised Jewish. He was Jewish. But he became an atheist. I went the Christian route. So we went totally separate, and we ended up not having a relationship anymore. But those things happen. I can think of some other people that I lost over the years too. So anyways, that's something that he's saying. If you're really a genuine Christian, you may lose some of these worldly friends, but there's a plus side. You're gaining Christ. You're gaining Christian friends on the other hand. Okay, considering these friends that they lost, they considered these Christians antisocial. Get this, unfriendly, bigoted, because of the refusal to participate with them in their evil activities. These wild parties we're talking about, immoral activities. Okay. So now that's a very negative thing. It's hard to take. Now, all of a sudden, you're a bigot, We don't like to be called a bigot. Who wants to be called that? But there are people in this world today, around us today, that would call us bigots, right? Right now, if they knew some of the stands that we take for Christ, right? All right. So that's something that is happening in our country right now, and in some mild forms, I would say. But it can get worse. It can get a lot worse. We don't accept homosexuality. We don't want to go around bashing gays, but we don't accept that lifestyle. That's just that one thing. We could name several others. We don't accept that, and so the world wants to accept that. They want everybody's the same. But the Bible teaches us there are certain lifestyles that God hates, that are abomination to Him. So we do not accept something like that. Okay, so we could be called bigots. Maybe we are right now by some people in this neighborhood. I don't know. But if they, we make certain stands for Christ, and that can happen. We could lose friends. We can get like a bad reputation with certain people. So that's where suffering can come in, and persecution at some point. That rarely happens in our country, but it could get worse. Is all I'm saying. And that's what Peter's saying, because this letter was not just written for the people in his century; it's written to us today in the 21st century. That's why it's relevant to all ages. It's never going to be irrelevant. It's always going to be relevant. The Bible is always relevant. So Peter encourages them by reminding them that their former friends will have to face God someday, who stands ready to judge everyone. That's right in there. You read carefully, you'll see that. Right in there. So there's a judgment coming. That should be a comfort to us, right? That God's gonna make everything right. He's gonna be the great judge someday. He's gonna even everything out and right wrongs that were committed. So that's a thought that we need to keep in the back of our minds. That's a thought that he has in his mind, I'm sure. And he's encouraging the church and us today to keep this thought in our minds. They're going to have to face God, just like we're going to have to face God, but we'll be on the right side of things. The sheep and the goats are going to be separated, right? We're going to be with the sheep. They're going to be the goats. That's the picture we get in Scripture, in the Gospel, see? So that should be a comfort to a Christian, though. Not that we want to, see people, be condemned and sent to a terrible place like what's called hell, but that's the picture we get in Scripture. All right, so they will have to face God who stands ready to judge them. Okay, so that's in that scripture there. All right, who wants to read, Michael, you want to read verse 6? Let's move on a little bit.
You already read verse
7.
Wait a minute. All right, I guess we read verse 6. All right,
6. Can't read this on the right.
I stating, I lost my place here. Oh wait, let me, a little further. Peter further encourages his readers by stating that Christians who have died recently now live forever with God in the Spirit. Okay, that's a further encouragement. Not only are they going to be judged, but there's hope for a better life. Thus, his readers and all Christians have this hope. All right, this is the hope we were talking about earlier. We have this hope. It's a living hope that hopefully stays with us through the thick and thin of life, whatever comes our way. Like I said, there's different waves of different evil things. The world's always changing slowly in different ways, and we never know what's coming around the next bend. Sometimes the next corner. But I mean, we have an idea usually, but not always. We can't always see everything. But he wants them to be able to be sustained during these challenging times by setting their hope on Jesus. And that, again, this is a picture of how a mature Christian looks. They have this hope that Jesus is going to judge the world, and there's a better life coming for those who follow him. That's the bottom line. Okay, so I hope we all have that hope this morning. If we don't, we need to get it firmly inside of us. But we're going to need it to get all through this life. We need that additional hope that the world doesn't have. The world has a lot of hope, right? Well, they hope that we're going to get a better politician elected, or the economy's going to get better, war is going to stop over in the Middle East. There's always some hopeful things out there, but they're superficial, and they come and they go. And the hope that comes from Christ, though, and the Bible, God, is a deeper hope that sinks right into us, and it's there to sustain us during hard times. Okay. So that's one of the main messages of this book that Peter's trying to get across to us. Okay, let's read verse 7. Anybody want to volunteer?
I'll read it.
All right.
And I'm reading ESV, English Standard. That's my new. Okay, the end of all things is at hand. Therefore, be self-controlled and sober-minded for the sake of your prayers.
All right, this is a kind of a radical departure. All of a sudden, Peter says, the end is near. I mean, that's a really bold statement there, isn't it? But what he's probably referring to here, this is where you have to study a little bit, is the end of the Jewish state is coming to an end. He's writing to Jewish and Gentile people. Okay, it's a mixture type church in Asia Minor, and we know all the things of Moses and the Old Testament are coming to an end, and Christ is starting a new era, right? A major change is taking place right here. So that's what the scholars think he's referring to here. He knows that God is not going to come tomorrow. He's not going to say that. Get ready, Jesus is coming back tomorrow. But he's making this bold statement here. The end is near, and he's going to tell them what to do about that. About the end of Judaism is coming to an end. The Christian era is starting. And so he makes a sudden turn, you might say. He doesn't advise us or them to quit our jobs, right? He could say that. Sell your possessions or move to a secure location. See, if he really thought that the end was coming tomorrow, he would have said that. But he doesn't. There's no panic here. There's no panic. All right? So the opposite. What does he say? Be earnest and disciplined in prayer. That's a very peaceful thing, right? That's nothing about panic there. So I would say that one of the greatest things we can do is to prepare for Christ's return is to pray, right? I mean, that's the basic part of the Christian life. We should be into prayer every single day. That's something that's going to sustain us and keep us going through persecution or good times or whatever comes our way. But he tells them to pray. So that's why we don't think he was saying, predicting that there's going to be an immediate Jesus coming. And we should pray, what should we pray for? Well, I would suggest we should pray for wisdom and how we should live before the lost, right? We're to live a life that's exemplary, one that helps bring them to Christ, like Patrick was talking about this morning, right? If we don't live a life that's going to be attractive in some ways and genuine, the lost are not going to come to Christ. That people, and when we speak to others about Christ, if we don't have a genuine type of a Christian lifestyle to back it up, we're not going to have credibility. So he's talking about we need to have some credibility, and prayer is going to help us to have that credibility and lifestyle that we need to have. We should pray for wisdom. Hopefully we'll receive that wisdom and how we can reach out to the lost before Christ comes again. And we should also pray for boldness in how we should share the gospel message with the lost. As Patrick kind of mentioned this morning, it takes some boldness, right? Because we're not comfortable all the time about speaking to people, right? We think it's not polite. And some people are going to resent our speaking to them about Christ. Let's face it. Some people don't want to hear the message of Christ. For some reason or another, they've got a bad impression of Jesus and what the church is about or the Bible or something. And they probably got some bad information somewhere along the line. False news kind of thing. So they've got this. So it takes a little boldness to overcome that, right? And speak up to somebody about Jesus and try to get, see if there's an opening where we can get in and reach out to them for Jesus and maybe get them into a Bible study, maybe get them to come to church or VBS or whatever it is that we have an opening for them to enter into. Because there are some people that will be open. There are always some out there that may be in the minority, but there are some people out there that haven't heard much about Jesus and maybe they'd be open to learning more about him. So this is what he's talking about. Pray that we have for boldness. We should pray for boldness. I think as often as we can think of it, to try to reach out to those around us that we rub shoulders with. We all rub shoulders with different people every week, right? I don't care if it's at work, in our neighborhood, our families, people that are not Christians that we can try to reach out to. There are opportunities there. We have to look for them though. And he's saying, pray for boldness so that we and wisdom, so we can know how to share the gospel. Because it's not easy to share the gospel, right? There's many different ways we can do it. I've heard probably 20 different methods in my lifetime how to reach out to people. Different kinds of Bible studies, different things we can say about our life in Christ, and try to witness, in different ways, and try to lead them into a Bible study of some kind or another. My Bible, when I was in college, I had 200 references from Genesis to Revelation, and you just follow. It was a chain method, they called it. You just go from one scripture to the next, and it takes you on a complete path through the Bible, all about God and the church and salvation, and it covers all the bases, And I still have that Bible, but that was a method that was promoted years ago. Now, most people will not sit down for hours to go through 200 scriptures with you. So that doesn't really work too good today. Years ago, people were more willing to sit down and study the Bible, and you could get somebody into a Bible study for a couple hours here and there. We had film strips we used to show people, and they would sit for 2 hours and look to those Joe Miller film strips, and people came to Christ. That's one reason the Church of Christ grew so much. Back in that was back after World War II, because we had these film strips and we went out and showed them, and we had different methods. But you try doing that today, and most people are not going to be open to it. For some reason, they're too busy. They're running from here to there, and they got all these things to do, and it's very hard to get somebody to sit down. And if you can find somebody that you can do that with, great. You should have that method handy, maybe, that you could use. Now they have it on a computer. You can do a computer study with people. But I'm just saying, it's not easy to always find the right method to connect with the right person, But we need to have a witness. We need to have something that we can tell people. That we can witness about our faith, and we need to have a method that we can take them into the Bible and show them the plan of salvation and what it means to be a Christian. Are we running out of time?
Yes.
Oh, sorry, I lost track of time here. Okay, well, we'll stop there then. We'll continue on next week. Any questions so far in chapter 4? I mean, there's a lot in there. Maybe I overdid it, but there's a lot in there if you dig into the different verses. Peter is a very good speaker. He was the spokesman of the group, you know, the early disciples. You can see why. He was an ignorant fisherman, but he gained a lot of knowledge. He's like a college graduate. I guess walking with Jesus for 3 years, he learned an incredible amount. That's all I can say. And he had a lot of potential. Jesus found a good student in this fisherman, and he trained him. And so we're seeing that in his letters. So, okay, we'll leave it there. Have a good week, everybody, and we'll continue on with this next week before Alan gets back. All right.
Good lesson. I appreciate your energy.
All right.
You filled with the spirit, that's all.